Hey everybody, and Tony here, and this is a very special video in which I am very excited to talk about. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you know this, but for those of you who don't, aside from being a huge fan of opera, classical music, and movies, I am a huge fan of Japanese anime. In fact, it's one of my most favorite creative mediums of all time. And this all started ever since I was about 3 or 4 years old when I started watching Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon. And then as time went on, I started watching um, Saint Tail, Akazukin Cha-Cha, Ninja Robots, Tenchi Muyo, and Gundam Wing. Oh, and also Flame of Recca. And then we had Ninku, Cooking Master Boy, Power Star, Street Fighter X, a little bit of Akira, and, well, mainly a lot of animes that came out from the 80s to 90s. Oh, and especially this really old anime in which a boy sneezes and then pops out a genie from a bottle. Now, that was one that I've watched, but it's actually quite obscure from my memory, though there are little bits and pieces of it that are slowly coming back into my mind. So, as time went on, and when I was 12, I religiously watched a lot more anime, and it's all thanks to one network called Animax, where they aired a lot of animes like Detective School Q, Ghost Stories, Cardcaptor Sakura, Daigunder, DTA-tron, Wolf's Rain, Technolize, Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, and many other animes that haven't really had a lot of commercial success or even had some commercial success, though not totally mainstream. So it was pretty much an eye-opener for me ever since I was very young. So for this video, I'm going to count down my top 15 most favorite animes of all time. And this is going to be a three-parter because as I've recorded this video, as I've attempted to record this video, the first try, I found it was just way too long. So I found out that the best way to really get my opinions of all 15 of my favorite animes out of the way, and since I'm very in-depth with each of them, I have to split this into three parts. So the first part is going to be the entries from number 15 to number 11. So with that said, let's get started. At number 15, we have Chrono Crusade. Now, Chrono Crusade tells the story about a young nun by the name of Sister Rosette Christopher, who is aided by her demon partner Chrono, in which she joins the Order of Magdalene, a secret group which specializes in exterminating demons through the use of guns and a lot of other weapons while attacking, of course. Now, she joins this secret organization because she wants to rescue her younger brother Joshua from the clutches of an evil demon by the name of Ion. Now, what got me hooked into this show was that when I was about 14 years old and I caught this on Hero TV, I was quite intrigued by the art style and, of course, the very fluid choreography of the fight scenes that Rosette, Chrono, Zatala, and Asmaria got themselves into. Not to mention, I was also quite intrigued by this story, and this was one of the animes that is also set in the Roaring Twenties America, almost similar to how Full Metal Alchemist took place in the 1900s in a sort of European American-like town. And with Chrono Crusade, this basically took place in America, which brings a little bit of distinction to a lot of the animes I've been watching. Now, what really made me enjoy this anime are the characters, the situations that they get themselves into, their motivations, and just about everything, especially the main villain, Ion. Oh my god, is this villain just so fascinating to watch, or what? This is a villain which manages to make my skin crawl from beginning to end at just how twisted his motivations really are. And this is all thanks to the terrific voice acting by Kazuhiko Inoue on the Japanese side and Annie McCavan on the English side. Not to mention, the voice cast is especially top notch on both tracks. You had the likes of Tomoko Kawakami, Saeko Chiba, Akira Ishida, Michiko Neya, Yoshiko Sakakibara, and Natsuko Kuwatani, who voiced their roles perfectly, especially Kawakami as Sister Rosette Christopher. This is one of her most well-known roles of all time, and I'll get to her other most well-known roles later in this list. And it's no wonder why a lot of fans and critics really like her in this role. She manages to get Rosette's toughness, and she manages to get her independence and fiery nature very well, though she manages to add a little bit of loyalty and sweetness. And this is also going to be a little bit of a spoiler, but she also voiced her ancestor, Mary Magdalene. Now, with Mary Magdalene in her portrayal in that role, she managed to give a very sweet and very calming portrayal of that role. Now, with Akira Ishida as Chrono, I really like his portrayal. He was able to make Chrono a very sympathetic and very sweet character. With Michiko Neya as Zatela, she was able to make her a very proud and very sultry type of character. And Saeko Chiba as Asmaria, a very sweet and very docile character. She manages to really pull it out very well. And also the English dub for Chrono Crusade is also well done, with the likes of Hilary Haig as Rosette Christopher, Greg Ayres as Chrono, Tiffany Grant as Zatela, Jessica Boone as Asmaria, and Annie McCavan as Ion. All of these voice actors managed to do their roles very well. And say what you will about Hilary Haig as Rosette, but I personally had a lot of fun with her, as she manages to get the spunk of this character. Not to mention, Hilary Haig is very well known for voicing a lot of very spirited, very energetic young girls or even young women. And this is definitely one of her best roles, and personally, one of my most favorite roles of all time, aside from her portrayal as Satsuki from Ghost Stories. And what also makes this anime really worthwhile for me is it's quite similar to Full Metal Alchemist in terms of its religious themes, and especially when it comes to the villains that they have to face. Now, Ion's minions are basically quite similar to the homunculi. Yeah, even Ion himself is quite similar to King Bradley, though Ion is a lot more twisted. Oh, and I also have to mention that Rosette is extremely similar to that of Edward Elric. Because when you think about it, they're both short-tempered blondes, but have a very loyal heart and really mean well to the story. Now, why is Chrono Crusade only at number 15? Well, there are a couple of minor nitpicks. Like, there are tendencies in which there are filler episodes, but I could totally let that slide because they could really develop the characters more. Now, in terms of its popularity, when you compare the likes of Chrono Crusade to a lot of the bigger animes that came out in 2003, like Full Metal Alchemist, it kind of paled in terms of the popularity. Not a lot of people talk about it, and it's quite underrated when you think about it, and also quite obscure, which is such a pity. And it's also because it's often been compared to its much more successful cousin, Full Metal Alchemist. But still, Chrono Crusade is definitely an anime that is a must-watch when you like strong female leads and a plot that will leave you on the edge of your seats every single time. And sure, there are times in which in the more serious previews or in the serious previews, there's a little bit of that silly music playing, but despite that, it's still a solid watch. Oh, and the final few episodes will leave you in tears, so do prepare for for a box of tissue for those. So, nonetheless, Chrono Crusade is at a solid number 15. Now, number 14 goes to Wolf's Rain. Now, Wolf's Rain is extremely well known for its very gorgeous, lush, and serene animation. Every single frame of animation is just so jaw-droppingly awesome to look at. The character designs, the background designs, everything about it is just so stylistically gorgeous, and it has held up very well. For me, it's almost hard to believe that this show nowadays is about 11 going on 12 years old. Now, that is just showing how Bones is extremely well known for making animation that is just so top notch. And the story is equally as well done as well. It tells the story of four wolves by the name of Kiba, Tsume, Hige, and Toboe, who are searching for this flower of paradise so that they can have eternal life. Now, during their journey, they encounter a lot of troubles in terms of how the humans look at them, how human race is kind of declining, and all of that, and in terms of their search of paradise and their own questions about life and death. It's very interesting when you think about it. Not to mention, the cast of characters is extremely solid. You have Kiba, who is, well, pardon the pun, a pretty lone wolf and has to search for his paradise. And Tsume, who starts out as a bastard, but you kind of warm up to him. Hige is pretty much the light of the group, as he's always shown to be very optimistic and very sweet. And I especially like the chemistry that he has with Kiba. They seem to really make really great bros, so to say. And then you have Toboe, the youngest of the group. And then the bread and butter of Wolf's Rain is the young flower girl named Cheza. Now, she is definitely the link to what actions Wolf's Rain is going through, because she herself is like the guardian of the flower. And then you have other interesting villains like Darcia. Now, I would have to say that Darcia has a presence that will make your skin crawl, and one that you'll feel in awe watching him, but one that you kind of wish that you weren't gonna mess with him anytime soon. And it also offers some interesting human characters like Hub Lebowski and his estranged wife Cher. So there's a lot of interesting character dynamic, but there are moments in which the show has the tendency to be very quiet. And sometimes you just have to keep your brain on, and sometimes keep your eyes open just to really admire of the efforts that Wolf's Rain manages to put itself through. And the voice cast is equally amazing. While you have voice actors like Mamoru Miyano as Kiba, Akio Suyama as Hige, Kenta Miyake as Tsume, you also have on the English side Johnny Young Bosch in the role of Kiba, Joshua Seth as Hige, Crispin Freeman as Tsume, Mona Marshall as Toboe, and they all put in such awesome performances in which I would actually watch Wolf's Rain a lot in dub. Don't get me wrong, the Japanese dub is absolutely great in its own merit, with the likes of Miyano performing the role very well. But I would have to say that Wolf's Rain is pretty much best watched in English, because sometimes the dialogue feels a lot more natural when hearing them pour out of the characters' mouths. So like I said, Wolf's Rain is definitely a testament of just how well it holds up stylistically, and sometimes in terms of its story, as it's very fascinating. Number 13 has to go to Revolutionary Girl Utena. Now, what makes Revolutionary Girl Utena a very worthy entry in this top 15 list is just how it manages to deconstruct the romance anime tropes, and not just the romance anime tropes, but also the fantasy and magical girl anime tropes that we kind of get used to seeing. Now, before Madoka Magica came out, there were the likes of Revolutionary Girl Utena, Sailor Moon, Cardcaptor Sakura, and many other magical girl series. Now, with Revolutionary Girl Utena, it managed to be a lot more different than the likes of Sailor Moon, because with this anime, it shows that the main character wants to prove herself that she can be a hero, she can be a prince, she can be a prince in those fairy tales and save the princess. And the story of it is actually quite fascinating. Now, Utena starts out as an everyday high school student, though unlike any other girl, she participates in a lot of physical activities in which the boys usually get themselves into. She dresses up very differently from the girls. Instead of wearing that typical schoolgirl uniform, she opts for like short red shorts and a black uniform top, which sort of like befuddles certain people, and especially her teachers. One day, she sees a mysterious young girl by the name of Anthe, and she gets slapped around by a green-haired young man by the name of Kyoichi Saionji. On that fateful day, she challenges Saionji to a duel, and then, after she defeats him, she becomes, well, Anthe's prince. And alongside that, there are a lot of interesting and somewhat bizarre twists and turns going on at the Otori Academy, and especially between the relationship between Utena and Anthe. Now, this is what really fascinated me about Revolutionary Girl Utena. It is, in a word, very surreal. The animation will go out of its way to be as bombastic, as extravagant, well, for the time in the 90s, and just as vivid. Now, looking at it today, it is quite dated by today's standards since this came out in 1997. But if you take that all away, you kind of realize that it's actually held up very well in terms of the visuals. And especially when it comes to the character designs. Now, even though they're quite typical, these kind of look a little bit outlandish. I mean, the characters look very slim, have long necks, very slim figures, and have different color hairs. Now, I thought that just looks very fascinating and somewhat bizarre, but fascinating. Not to mention the top-notch voice casting. You have the likes of, well, what do you know? This is yet another one of Tomoko Kawakami's best roles of all time, and one that critics really seem to love, and especially the fans, since, well, there are also times that Kawakami-san has been also very well known in voicing these tomboyish characters. Aside from Sister Rosette, she also voiced Soifon and also Kichijoji from Steel Angel Kurumi. And this is probably one of my most favorite roles because she was able to make Utena a very strong-hearted, very loyal, yet somewhat inquisitive young teenage girl. And she manages to make her very determined and strong. And this is what I really love about her performance. Yuriko Fuchizaki as Anthe manages to make her a very sweet, very docile, yet a very mysterious and very enigmatic character. Now, when it comes to the other voice actors that have lent their voices, you have the likes of Takehito Koyasu as Toga Kiryu. You had Hikaru Midorikawa as Soji Mikage. You had Jirota Kosuke as Akio Otori. Takeshi Kusao as Kyoichi Sayonji. Yuri Shiratori as Nanami Kiryu. Koto no Mitsuishi as Juri. And then you had Aya Hisakawa as Kaoru Miki, though I personally like Aya Hisakawa in her more feminine roles. But this is actually a very interesting, like, foray into young teenage boys. Oh, and not to mention Satomi Korogi as Chuchu. Wow. Every time I hear Chuchu say Chuchu, I just think it's just so adorable. And not to mention, Satomi Korogi is a mistress, or excuse me, a master when it comes to voicing extremely cutesy characters. Well, next to the likes of Ikue Otani and Yukari Tamura. So yes, as much as I also like the Japanese dub of this anime because it's so full of veterans, I also have to say that the English dub manages to be pretty solid as well, with the likes of Rachel Lillis giving a very equally great interpretation of Utena, and Crispin Freeman as Toga Kiryu is just made of epicness. But the standouts for me in the English dub definitely have to be Rachel Lillis as Utena and Crispin Freeman as Toga Kiryu. So yes, Revolutionary Girl Utena is surreal, yet manages to be very exciting from point A to point B, and that's why it stands as number 13. And number 12 has to go to a very interesting anime that is actually quite sensitive when it comes to such a controversial topic, and that goes to Koikaze. Now, Goikaze is a very interesting anime, and is an especially interesting installment in this list because, well, this basically talks about incest. Now, wait. Don't turn off the video. Don't stop the video. Let me explain. Now, when it comes to incest in certain media, a lot of people tend to either shy away from it or they kind of think that it's way too touchy or just simply put way too sick to even put something like that on. And if you look at certain titles like Kiss X Sis, as reviewed by a very good friend of mine, Tony Watley II, aka the Black Critic Guy, yeah, I actually felt his pain when he reviewed that anime. You'll kind of realize that when it comes to, oh yeah, and when he also reviewed Yosuke no Sora, yeah, I also felt your pain, Tony. Believe me, I felt your pain, and you can see that I don't want to even bother watching Yosuke no Sora. So, anyways, yeah, when it comes to incest in anime, well, it's either fetishized or like used as fan service. Now, Koikaze is one of those titles that manages to use incest in a very honest and somewhat very down to earth way. Now, let me explain why. Now, just like what Yeizo Otaku said in her review of Koikaze, the relationship between Koshiro and Nanoka is not sexualized and it's not fetishized. You see, Koshiro is a big, burly 27-year-old man, while Nanoka is a very sweet-looking young 15-year-old girl. Now, age differences aside, yes, it also kind of irked certain people, but what really makes this shine is the writing of how seriously this manages to be taken itself, and how honest it really is. So basically, the story of Koikaze is about a young man named Koshiro Saeki who is already going through a huge funk that he already broke up with someone, and his former girlfriend asked him, "Do you truly love someone from the bottom of your heart?" And he's not really sure of that. until he meets a young girl by the name of Nanoka, and they go out a little bit until they find out from Koshiro's dad that Nanoka is his own sister. And, well, let's just say that a lot of things start happening, and certain tensions seem to arise between the two characters. So, yes, these two characters are in doubt, especially Koshiro, and sometimes they're not even so sure if what they're doing in society is right. And that's what really makes me love Koikaze from the very first moment I watched it. Now, you'll come to notice that the animation is very muted and has a very, quiet sort of palette. And it also reflects upon the music. Well, the background music of the show, even though it has the tendency to be pretty repetitive, it manages to portray the sweetness and the tragedy and the melancholy nature of these two characters who try to really get used to their own feelings for each other. And this is also helped by the voice casting. Now, as much as I do like Genta Miyake's portrayal as Koshiro, I have to say that Patrick Zeitz in this role manages to be very well done. Stephanie Sheh is actually pretty good in her role. And like I said, all the characters are very likable and are very interesting. And you know what? They don't really feel like your typical anime tropes. They basically feel like real people. They're not loud, they're not obnoxious, they're just, well, simply put, human, in a sense. So this is what really makes Koikaze a very solid place at my number 12 spot. And number 11 goes to Paradise Kiss. Now, Paradise Kiss is what I would say is one of those installments that is just so gorgeous to look at, yet manages to have a very intriguing story about adolescence and growing up, done in a very subtle and a very meaningful way. It tells the story about a young girl by the name of Yukari Hayasaka who has to run back home to her house to study for her final exams. And she's been basically struggling to get her mother's acceptance after 12 long years. And she feels like she's being a burden towards her own family. Until she meets a young man in a punk outfit who basically follows her around and she's not really aware of what his business is until she passes out and finds herself in a small studio behind a red door. And there she meets a lot of colorful characters, the childish Mawako, and aside from the punky Arashi, she also meets the very elegant Isabella, and of course, the suave and very articulate George. Now, they convince her that she can be a model for their little company. And of course, Yukari is quite skeptical at first, but after some thinking, managed to be their model, though she is faced constantly with the doubts of how she's going to see herself in the near future or how she's going to fare growing up. Now, this is what really makes it a very interesting entry for me because of just how real it is when it comes to portraying teenagers, especially when it comes to how true to life it is and how it speaks to a lot of the youth who are very uncertain of what they're doing in their lives, or especially to certain college students as well, because the majority of the main cast of Paradise Kiss usually range from high school students to college students. And this is what really makes it a very interesting anime. And I'm also pretty much a sucker for josei. And believe me when I say that this isn't the only josei related anime that's going to be on this list. And the characters, like I said, are very fascinating. Sure, sometimes you may not liking some of the characters, but sure, they've made mistakes and they're very flawed people. But that's what really makes them human, and that's what really makes them relatable in a way. In fact, that's what I really liked about Paradise Kiss. Every character that I managed to get myself into managed to be very human and extremely likable. And especially when it comes to the voice acting. Now, what I've noticed about the Japanese voice acting is that, well, when it came to Yukari's voice actress, Yu Yamada, this is her only anime role. Aside from that, she has a very extensive live action and a very extensive drama repertoire, but her repertoire is actually quite limited to that. And this is her only anime role. Then you had other seiyus like Kenji Hamada who voiced George. And I haven't really heard his name a lot, and basically that's pretty much it. A lot of the voice actors and voice actresses in Paradise Kiss on the Japanese side are basically a lot more well known for their live action roles. Now, in the English dub, you have Julianne Taylor, Derek Stephen Prince, and Melissa Fawn. All of them being like veteran voice actors and portraying their roles very well. And I'd have to say that both dubs are worth a listen. And believe it or not, I used to catch this on Animax, so I did enjoy this ever since I was a teen, and I still enjoy it to this very day of just how truthful it is. So Paradise Kiss is definitely number 11 on my list. Well, that's it for part 1. Be sure to tune into part 2, where I discuss my number 10 to number 6 entry. So until then, see you later, everybody.